limitations to broadcast media.
그래서 이제 이미 알고 계신 것처럼 지금 이란 한국 주재하는 이란 방송국에서 일을 하고 있는데 지난 5년 동안 그 분야에서 일을 하게 되면서 생각하게 된 점들을 오늘 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
I should mention first how I bumped into Kyoung-Ho. When I first started with Press TV, I didn't really have much broadcast experience, and Press TV didn't have a big budget, so I went to SBS and I asked them to help me produce video reports for Press TV.
그래서 처음에 말씀드렸던 것처럼 김경호 작가님과의 관계를 아주 간략하게 설명하자면 처음에 프레스 TV에서 일을 할 때는 방송 경험이 별로 없었고 더군다나 예산도 많이 부족했기 때문에 처음에 SBS에 가서 방송국에 가서 도움을 요청하게 되었습니다.
But SBS really couldn't. I couldn't afford to use SBS. This won't play with video player. This is a different version of.
This is the Syrian capital Damascus of attack.
Stop it.
International news and information. This is
Way down. Just a little bit in the back. Yeah. Good. Okay. So I started to look around for somebody to help me produce video because I didn't really know much how to use a video camera. I hadn't appeared on camera. The reason I got the job is from a referral, not through my broadcast experience. So I had to learn everything. When I got in touch with Kyoung-Ho, who was working at the Korean Academy of Film Arts, I think is a technical manager there, and he trained me how to video edit with Final Cut Pro. He basically video edited the first news package I did, and then gradually I learned through working with him and reading the Final Cut Pro book, and working with that, and then I video edited the 10th package.
처음에 특히나 방송 경험이 있어서 이 직업을 갖게 된 것이 아니었기 때문에 아주 기본적인 것들을 다 하나씩 배워가면서 하셨어야 되는데 이를테면 카메라를 켜고 그걸로 찍고 그것을 에디팅하고 하는 프로그램에서부터 카메라를 다루는 것까지 모든 것을 다 알 수가 없었기 때문에 도움이 필요했었고 그 당시에 여기 계신 김경호 작가님을 만나게 되어서 아주 기본적인 것들을 하나하나 배워가기 시작했고요. 그래서 파이널 컷 프로북 같은 에디팅 프로그램북까지 다 이렇게 끼고 하면서 이제는 스스로 그런 에디팅까지 할 수 있게 되었습니다.
And after that 10th news package, over the past 5 years, I've produced about 500 news packages. For the first year or so, the first 100, I did them primarily by myself, where I would set up the camera, and then to shoot what's called a piece-to-camera, PTC, or a stand-up, we'd have to press the button on the camera, then run around to the other side and stand with the microphone and do the part, and then walk around and check the camera again, and do it again, and back and forth. Sometimes even at news conferences at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, I would be doing that type of thing to have a really good background, of the Korean flag and the podium and everything like that. But it was really good training ground for me to learn how to work with media. Number one, and number two, how media works. And that's more what I'm going to talk about today is how media works and the implications of what's happening in media today, the implications of the nationalization and sensationalism in international news media.
그래서 처음 지난 5년까지 방송 활동 중에서 약 500개 정도 되는 그 비디오 푸티지를 만드셨는데 처음에 약 100개 정도를 만들 때 정말로 혼자서 다 붙이고 장붙이고 하는 시스템이었고요. 그래서 이를테면 카메라를 켜놓고 그것을 이렇게 뒤에 샷을 잡은 다음에 스스로 버튼을 누르고 다시 카메라 앞으로 와서 아무렇지도 않은 듯 이렇게 보도를 하고 또 다시 카메라 뒤로 가서 장면을 확인하고 하는 등 혼자서 이 모든 걸 다 제작을 하게 되는 하는 그런 정신없는 경험이었지만 지금 와서 생각하니까 그것이 굉장히 훌륭한 그런 연습 기간이었던 것 같고요. 그래서 오늘 드리고 싶은 얘기는 이런 미디어가 어떤 의미를 가지고 있는지 그리고 그런 미디어의 이제 정치적인 함의에 대해서 얘기를 해보고자 합니다.
Okay, since that time and over the period that I produced for Press TV, I managed to, wrench some more money out of them to change the contract and to hire some more people to work with. So someone here who's videotaping this became a camera operator, and then because I wanted to move into other sort of areas of journalism and politics, I decided I wanted to step away from being a correspondent and do some other things. Right now, I teach at Ewha Women's University in the media department, just a couple of journalism courses, one each term, and I'm also studying at Korea University at their GSIS in peace and security, and that's sort of the area that I want to work in the future in journalism or academia in political science, East Asian peace and security.
그래서 그 이후로 좀 그 회사와 이런 말도 안 되는 시스템에 대해서 조금 상의를 한 후에 그래서 따로 이런 카메라라든지 기술적인 부분을 작동할 수 있는 책임을 질 수 있는 사람들을 불러오게 했고요. 그래서 저는 지금은 조금 더 어떤 이런 저널리즘과 정치학 간의 관계라든지 하는 것들을 좀 더 연구하고 바라볼 수 있도록 시간을 더 할애하게 되었고요. 그래서 지금은 이화여대에서 그리고 고려대학교에서 관련된 학과에서 공부를 하면서 저의 그런 관심사와 전문 분야를 조금 더 저널리즘과 정치의 관계, 특히 이 동아시아 쪽에서의 어떤 그런 것들이 보여지는 예들을 찾아서 포커스를 하고 있습니다.
Now I'm going to get a little bit more into the specifics of my presentation on the political implications of the nationalization and sensationalism in international news media. The free flow of news and information is widely proclaimed as a necessity for a well-functioning democracy or a well-functioning society. But when we take a careful look at news reporting of events and issues of intense national interest, one can find that while there may be a free flow of news and information, that stream of news and information is polluted by the motivation of nation states.
그래서 오늘 이 강의의 제목인 그 국제 뉴스 매체에서 보여지는 어떤 내셔널리즘과 그다음에 선정주의적인 어떤 정치적인 함의에 대해서 얘기를 하고자 하는데 결국엔 지금 우리가 처한 환경이 온갖 그 뉴스와 인포메이션 정보들이 시시때때로 이렇게 넘쳐나는 그런 시대에 살고 있지만 사실상 지금 접하고 있는 그런 뉴스나 정보들은 굉장히 많이 오염되어 있다고 볼 수가 있는데요.
Nations exercise their power over the media either directly through a burgeoning new industry of international state news broadcasters, such as we have here in Korea. You have Parat News, and you have KBS. Japan has NHK. Russia has Russia Today. Al Jazeera is Qatar's news organization. It's a state news organization. The BBC is a state news organization. France 24 is another new news organization. CCTV in China is another new news organization. These broadcasters, global international news broadcasters, have all come up in about the last decade. And Press TV, whom I used to work for, is also one of those.
그래서 이런 국가 차원에서 국가들은 이런 거대한 미디어들을 국가의 이익을 위해서 혹은 어떤 목표를 위해서 잘 활용을 한다고 볼 수 있는데 어쨌든 그런 대표적인 국영 방송들의 예를 들자면 한국의 KBS가 있을 테고요, 일본의 NHK, 러시아에는 러시아 투데이, 영국의 BBC 잘 아실 테고, 프랑스에는 프렌치 24, 그다음에 중국의 CCTV 차이나까지 이런 예들이 있습니다.
So while those state news organizations are going to put a particular perspective or put what we call a particular news frame on their presentation of events, nation states will also exercise influence over commercial media in various ways, and you see that particularly here in South Korea, the commercial influence of news media. So it's both direct through these state broadcasters and indirectly through their influence as powerful sources, official sources, that control what news gets out.
그래서 이런 국영 방송들의 특징은 이들이 보여주는 그런 방법이나 프레임 자체에서 정치적인 어떤 큰 영향력을 강하게 보여준다고 할 수가 있고요. 이런 직접적인 그런 방법 외에도 간접적으로도 또 상업적인 영향이 이렇게 스며들어 있는 것을 볼 수가 있습니다.
Okay, now in addition to the influence of states over media, I want to emphasize the influence of the market. For example, if we look here in South Korea or just about any country, if a news organization is going to set up a broadcast news bureau, their budget for that bureau will be in the neighborhood of $500,000 for 1 year. So, Ewha, 1 year. Then an office, local producer, translator, all the equipment, camera operator, and the journalist, correspondent, sure, a driver probably, and a vehicle, and ongoing expenses. The budget they're looking at $500,000 a year.
그래서 이렇게 간단히 말씀드린 그런 미디어에 대한 국가의 영향력뿐만 아니라 아주 중요한 또 다른 지점은 시장의 영향력일 텐데요. 어차피 어떤 방송 시스템을 하나 운영을 하는데 엄청난 돈이 드는데 약 5억 원이 든다고 볼 수가 있어요, 1년에. 그런데 거기에 들어가는 돈은 다 아시다시피 카메라맨, 프로듀서, 에디터, 통역하는 사람, 그리고 기자, 저널리즘, 그리고 이 모든 것들을 취재하러 다니기 위해서 필요한 그런 차도 있어야 될 테고요. 등등등등 해서 기본적으로 소요되는 것들을 다 계산을 하자치면 1년에 약 5억 원 정도가 필요하다고 볼 수 있습니다.
Okay, now in order to recover the costs of this news production, commercial news organizations and public-private news organizations, these media must appeal. So they believe they must appeal to the widest audience possible in order to maintain their share of viewers. They are not so much competing with other news organizations as they're competing with other media, other types of media, and other subject matter that's considered news. When I say news in quotations, what I mean is, for example, let's say entertainment news. And I'm going to give you a specific example of this. The Associated Press Television Network is a wire service for broadcasters, and they shoot video all over the world. Now, about 2 years ago, they started doing entertainment news. So they will say shoot Hallyu news here in news, and I use quotation marks, right? They will, for example, follow the Generation Girls and produce Generation Girls news, as opposed to, for example, follow the current news scandal involving the investigation into the election and the National Intelligence Service manipulation of the election. That story will not get reported in the foreign news. So, but Generation Girls, absolutely. And more resources are going towards Generation Girls news than other, what we would call hard news.
그래서 이런 미디어들이 사기업이든 공기업이든 궁극적으로 아주 보편적으로 이 기업들이 필요한 부분은 하고 싶어하는 부분은 결국엔 되도록 많은 관객들을 확보하는 것일 텐데 그래서 그 미디어의 영향력이 그만큼 많은 사람을 확보하고 있을 때 커지는 거죠. 그런데 그런 것이 중요하다 보니까 최근 한 2년 사이에 벌어진 일은 이런 뉴스가 아주 우리가 잘 알고 있는 그런 시사적인 내용 그런 이를테면 선거를 보도하고 취재하고 실질적으로 거기서 잘못된 점을 파악하거나 하는 식의 뉴스를 보도하는 것이 아니라 엔터테인먼트 뉴스라고 하는 것이 나오기 시작했고요. 그 엔터테인먼트 뉴스라고 하면 이를테면 소녀시대에 대한 보도를 하게 되는 거죠. 그리고 그런 소녀시대에 대한 보도 자체가 일반적으로 다른 시사적인 그런 하드 미디어라고 하는 하드 뉴스라고 하는 시사적인 내용을 보도하는 것보다 훨씬 더 많은 관객을 확보하게 되기 때문에 점점 그런 쪽의 비중이 늘어나고 있는 것이 현실입니다.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is just show you a couple of news clips to talk a little bit about how state news organizations have a different perspective on the same story. So right now there's a civil war taking place in Syria, in the Middle East. And there's a lot of different countries that are very interested in how that turns out. They have different economic interests, different security, political interests, different alliance interests. And those interests are played out in the press. And there's a battle in the press for what is truth. So you're going to see here a couple of different clips that really provide examples of how state media tries to get its national interests out there so that it can better portray their version of what is truth. We're going to start with Press TV.
그래서 오늘 몇 가지 예를 보여드리면서 이런 얘기를 하고 싶은데요. 특히 국영방송에서 어떻게 그런 미디어를 활용을 하여 자신들의 그런 국가적인 이익을 추구하는지 그래서 중앙아시아의 시리아에서 발생하고 있는 지금 사건들의 예를 들어서 그것을 보도하는 그 시리아의 국영방송의 클립을 보여드리면서 어떻게 국가가 자신들의 이익을 위하여 진실을 보도해야 되는 미디어가 아닌 진실을 조작하는 미디어 안에서 조작하는지 그리고 그 미디어들끼리 어떤 식의 전쟁을 치르고 있는지 그 안에서 진실을 보도하는 것이 아닌 예를 보여드리겠습니다.
Came under attack while reporting on air. Attack Syria is another indication that the foreign-backed militants will do anything to advance the aims and interests of the supporters.
We are at the TV and radio station Aleppo. It's a game. It's the heart of the countryside of Damascus.
This man, Maya Nasser, was one of Press TV's correspondents in Syria who gave us live interviews from the ground. But now he's no longer among us. Terrorist snipers gunned him down on Wednesday when he was at the site of powerful explosions that hit a military complex in the capital Damascus. This is the footage of today's twin blasts aired by the Syrian national television. The video shows how the headquarters of the Armed Forces General Staff was rocked by the two explosions. Syrian military sources say at least 4 security guards were killed, while 14 civilians and security personnel were wounded in the blasts. The umbrella group of armed groups in Syria, called the Free Syrian Army, has claimed responsibility for the attack. The 33-year-old Nasser was at the site when he was targeted by snipers in the gunfire following the blasts. These were his last moments.
Okay, now if you could listen to that at all, Press TV uses language such as insurgents, foreign-backed militants, and phrases like uncover foreign conspiracy going on in Syria despite the ban on pro-government media outlets. And it's using really politically charged language to put a news frame of a particular perspective on its presentation of events.
지금 이 클립을 보시면요, 여기 프레스 TV에서 특정 단어들을 굉장히 강조해서 사용을 했는데요. 이를테면 폭도 반란이 일어났다든지 아니면 무장을 하고 침입했다, 혹은 테러리스트, 스나이퍼 이런 식의 표현들, 그리고 이런 친정부 미디어를 반하는 음모가 있다라는 듯이 이런 식의 표현들이 사용되는데, 지금 보시면 이런 표현들 자체가 뉴스가 아주 친정부적인 시각을 가지고 특정 사건에 대해서 보도를 하고 있는 것이 적나라하게 드러나는 것을 볼 수 있습니다.
Okay, I'm going to move ahead to this France 24 news package and just watch a bit of this.
Explosions ring out in Salahdin. The sounds have become all too familiar to residents of the Aleppo suburb, that's been at the front line of fighting between rebels and government forces for weeks. This amateur footage was reportedly filmed on Tuesday, but the battle seems to have taken an even more violent turn since then. Rebels say they've been forced to retreat, with Syrian troops now claiming to control the district. Assad's forces have been reportedly amassing outside Syria's biggest city for weeks, ready to strike in what's seen as a crucial fight in the 17-month uprising.
The Battle of Aleppo is decisive. If Aleppo falls, it will be very difficult for Assad's government to stay in power, given the economic and strategic importance of Aleppo, given that it's very close to Turkey. It's the gateway to Europe.
Rebels say government troops have been moving into Aleppo from west to east, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. On the streets of Al-Sahara, some 25 kilometers west of Aleppo, residents point out evidence of the shelling. Houses have gaping holes, walls are battered with bullet holes.
You see, that's my house there. It was shelled. That's how Bashar killed my son.
Shelling is continuous every day. So many people have died in the shelling. For those who...
Now let's just think about that for a minute and compare it, let's say, to coverage of the war in Iraq. Now, when you saw coverage of the war in Iraq, what you saw were American officials giving news conferences, talking about how they had captured this city or captured that city, how their soldiers were doing in that war. In this footage that we just saw, this news package we just saw, what we saw were the rebel version of the truth. The official government sources were not presented in that news package at all. And the rebels, it is a term that sort of seeks to be objective. They're not using the term freedom fighter, which might carry a little bit more political connotations. But still, objectivity is very difficult, very hard to find, even in that news package.
지금 보신 자료는 프랑스 24라는 방송국의 보도 자료인데, 그 시대의 내전에 대해서 보도를 하고 있었습니다. 근데 이걸 얘기하기 전에 간략하게 우리가 쉽게 상상할 수 있는 이해로 얼마 전에 그 이라크 전쟁을 보도하는 수많은 매체들이 상상해 보건데, 그 이라크 전쟁을 얘기할 때 항상 그 미국의 입장에서 그 전쟁을 보도를 했었거든요. 아주 그건 너무나 극명하게 드러나서, 이를테면 미국이 지금 그 전쟁을 언제 들어가서 그들의 군인들이 무엇을 하고 있는지, 그들의 군인들이 얼마나 사상자가 얼마나 나왔는지 등의 그런 미국적인 아주 입장에서의 뉴스들만을 들었었던 것과 마찬가지로, 지금 보신 이 시리아 내전을 보도하는 프랑스 24에서도 이 내전의 성격을 아주 반란군이라는 단어로 이렇게 정해놓고 보도를 하고 있는 거죠. 이를테면 그들을 표현하는 데 있어서 좀 더 객관적인 시각을 유지하고자 했다면 프리덤 파이터라는 자유를 찾아 싸우는 사람들 이런 식의 다른 단어도 있었을 텐데, 아주 그냥 단정적으로 반란군이라는 단어를 사용하면서 시리아 내전을 보도를 하는 등 그 객관적이지 못한 치우쳐져 있는 미디어의 모습들을 우리는 너무 이렇게 늘 접하고 있다는 사실입니다.
Okay, I'm going to show you just 2 more clips about this issue in Syria, then we'll get into Korea, and I know that you're going to be very interested in the Korean clip that I show in a minute. So just hang on, here's one more version of the news in Syria, and in this one you can really see the politics behind what's going on, because on Russia Today, they take direct aim at French foreign policy.
그래서 시리아 내전에 관련된 2개의 클립을 저 보겠습니다.
Heavy artillery to the Syrian rebels to help them fight President Assad's forces. And that's according to diplomatic sources who say Paris is also stepping up support for the Syrian opposition
He's
to help
very
forge
kind
a
of
government in waiting.
casual in the way he presents it. He's dismissive of perspective.
지금 보시는 그 러시아 투데이에서는 아주 그냥 정확하게 그 프랑스의 외교 정책의 목표를 두고 패키지를 만들어서 그 국가끼리의 어떤 대립되는 외교 정책의 시각이 이런 뉴스 보도를 통해서 너무나 드러나는 거죠. 어떤 객관적인 사건의 전달이요.
Now, the zones are being called so-called liberated zones, areas that are in the hands of rebels and that will ultimately be governing themselves.
This footage that you see is probably rebel supply footage or wire service footage. It's very common. It's been seen in different news packages of Russia Today and other news organizations. The news footage, just say the news footage is very common. This specific footage has been shown in different news organizations and is probably shot by rebels or wire service.
그래서 이 특정 스티지는 특히 시리아 내전을 이렇게 보도할 때 특정 이 비디오 스티지는 온갖 방송국에서 다 이렇게 공통적으로 보도가 되었었는데요. 아마도 이 자료는 그 무명의 그 반란군에서 이것을 일부러 찍어서 배포를 했거나 어쨌든 공통적인 이 후티지가 다른 방송국에서 다 같은 소식을 전할 때 사용이 되었었습니다.
The rhetoric coming out of Paris against Assad is also increasing. We're hearing from the French Foreign Minister that the Assad regime needs to be smashed. The problem is that when you use this kind of rhetoric and when you start sending heavy artillery...
What you're hearing now is she's doing what's called a rant. So when you stand in front of the camera and you just speak like this, she's speaking extemporaneously off the top of her head. She's not following a script. And she's the journalist. But she is analyzing the news. She is placing a very extraordinary and specific analysis onto the news, not being an objective observer or an objective presenter of the news, but again, placing specific analysis on the news, presenting herself as an expert on the events taking place in Syria.
조금 전에 보신 푸티지 같은 경우는요, 저분은 저널리스트이기 때문에 뒤에 어떤 화면이나 실제 그런 사건의 위치 앞에서 카메라 앞에서 이 마이크를 들고 이런 사건의 보도를 전달을 할 때는 관찰자의 입장에 이렇게 있어야만 하고 그리고 굉장히 객관적인 시각을 잃지 않고 말 그대로 이것을 전달하는 하여야만 할 텐데 지금 그 화면에서 보셨겠지만 이분은 스크립트 이미 적혀져 있는 스크립트를 읽는 사람이 아니라 즉흥적으로 머릿속에서 그 뒤에 사건을 자기식으로 해석을 해서 내어놓는 일종의 무슨 마냥 전문가인 마냥 해석을 집어넣은 그런 보도를 하고 있던 것을 볼 수 있었고요. 그거는 어떤 저널리스트의 태도와는 어긋나는 그런 행동이라고 볼 수 있습니다.
Okay, now this next package is from CCTV from China's, again, a new international news broadcaster. And these are all in English too. NHK English, CCTV English, Russia Today is in English, French 24 is in English. That's sort of the ground on which these international news media are battling. And I want you to look at this and I want you to think about how the video was produced. How did they get the different shots of video? Now, there's only one camera. The producers of this don't carry around 5 cameras twice the size of that camera. They carry around one camera, maybe that size, maybe a bigger camera. Okay? How did they get all of these shots? Let's take a look at this one.
그래서 지금 오늘 보여드린 이 방송국 자료들은 예를 들면 프레스 TV, 러시아 투데이, 프랑스 24 그리고 앞으로 보여드릴 중국의 CCTV까지 다 영어로 방영을 하는 보도를 하는 그런 방송 매체이고요. 그런 국제 정세나 사건을 보도하는 그런 매체들이고 이 매체들끼리 어떤 그런 전쟁이라든지 그런 서로 간의 견제를 볼 수 있지만 재미있는 건 이들 모두가 다 하나만의 비디오를 사용한다는 거고요. 한 번 찍어진 여러 개의 자료들을 이렇게 사용하는 것이 아니라 하나의 자료만을 사용한다는 것을 볼 수 있습니다.
In a makeshift storage depot, volunteers hand over a box of emergency aid to a Syrian refugee in the border town of Rehani. The carton contains a kilo of lentils, some pasta, sugar, and cooking oil. It's a lifeline for some Syrians living outside the refugee camps in Turkey. A van arrives to take aid to one of the camps. They can't spare much. A solitary box of supplies is delivered. This aid is from IHH, the Turkish Humanitarian Relief Foundation. Since the beginning of the Syrian conflict, they've been sending essential supplies to refugees and inside Syria. But there's never enough. Mustafa and Hamid.
Okay, I just wanted to show you that one little clip. That was just one camera. How was that done? Anybody have any ideas? Huh? Editing, sure. A lot was done editing. What else was done in terms of the people on the other side of the camera? What had to be done to the people on the other side of the camera? Exactly. They had to be directed, right? How did they get the shot from inside the truck of the person that they saw? He didn't run in the truck and jump in time, right? So he had to direct that person to behave in a certain way. That's not even documentary filmmaking. Then it's crossing well over the line into movie making, almost, right? And this is what you're encouraged to do in journalism, and one of the sort of difficulties, challenges, maybe problems with journalism. Now, I want to show you one other quick NHK bit, and see if you can tell me how much of this is being ad-libbed, like speaking then, and how much has been prepared.
그래서 좀 전에 보셨던 비디오 피티지 같은 경우는 보시면서 이상한 걸 아마 눈치채셨겠지만 어떤 특정 뉴스를 보도하는데 카메라 한 대가 그냥 그걸 쭉 관찰을 하고 있고 어떤 그 사이에 그 카메라가 잡고 있는 광경을 방해하거나 하는 요소들이 없었던 거죠. 그래서 아마도 우리는 추측하건대 어떤 아주 고난도의 에디팅 기술과 그리고 어쩌면 이 보도를 하기 위해서 그 카메라의 프레임에 들어오는 사람들을 이렇게 저렇게 연기하도록 하라 하는 지시가 있었을 것이다 라고 쉽게 알 수 있습니다.
300 UN observers have been monitoring a ceasefire, but their presence has done little to stop the fighting.
She's reading a teleprompter.
지금 이 저널리스트는 그 컴퓨터 기계를 통해서 읽고 있는 거죠, 스크립트를.
So what's the observers' role in Syria?
The UN sent observers only to monitor the ceasefire.
Who is he? Did you read that? Saying too fast, right? 5 seconds. Got to be up there 7 seconds, 10 seconds. In order for you to read it.
지금 방금 그 사람이 누군지 너무 빨리 지나가서 읽을 수가 없었죠.
Is he an expert? Is he a professor? Is he an analyst?
Was it an intention?
Who does he work for? He works for NHK. That's right. Wow, they got off all these pictures instantly.
in emergency video
Instantly, right away, they had him ready. Right when he said Barack Obama, boom, the Barack Obama picture came up. How did that happen? Is he speaking off the top of his head? I want you to look at his desk. Look at the desk in front of him. And it shows him again.
So, Lisa, we've been reporting on how the Russians and the Chinese view of intervening. What support is there for that position?
Both the Russians and the Chinese
Here
have
it comes.
resisted intervention at the UN and
Piece of paper.
There
goes the script. Okay.
지금 그래서 준비된 스크립트를 착실하게 읽고 있는 중입니다.
only on the condition that
So he's being presented as an expert, but he works for NHK, and everything he said has been scripted ahead of time, and that script has probably been vetted, been edited for its political content by somebody else before he presents it.
그래서 아마도 의심컨대 지금 전문가라고 초대된 저분은 NHK에서 준비된 어떤 자로서 미리 정치적인 어떤 합의에 관한 합의가 되어 있는 스크립트를 잘 읽고 있는 것이 아닌가라고 의심해 볼 수 있는 거죠.
Okay, now this is my favorite one. You can recognize maybe those islands there.
제가 제일 좋아하는 패키지인데요. 아마도 여러분이 저 섬을 쉽게
that
알아볼 수
sea
있으실 건데요.
there, and you can. I don't think you have to use too much of your imagination to.
A decision by South Korea to hold a military drill next month on Japanese islands in the Sea of Japan could spark more friction between the two countries. South Korea has controlled the Takeshima Islands since 1954, despite protests by Japan. Bilateral relations took a turn for the worse recently after South Korea's president visited the islands. The South Korean military conducts drills about twice a year on and around the islands, together with the police. A government official says the next drill will be held from September 7th to the 10th. Navy destroyers and submarines will take part in the exercise, and dozens of Marines are scheduled to land on Takeshima by helicopter. Relations between the two countries have been strained since President Kyoung-Ho visited Takeshima earlier this month. Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister
연합 방송들이 쉽게 이렇게 판매를 하는 그래서 누구나 다 쉽게 가질 수 있는 그런 비디오를 사용하고 있습니다.
So there you heard the islands called Takeshima several times. So hopefully, looking at all of these videos and taking a little bit closer look, it's demonstrated these trends in the nationalization of media and perhaps the political implications that might be a little bit more difficult to see right off the bat. Now, I want to look at a couple of problems with news stories also that demonstrate how the use of official sources and the sensationalization of media can also carry out political implications.
그래서 조금 전에 NHK에서는 반복적으로 타카시마 섬이라고 이렇게 보도를 하는 등 어떤 아주 극명하게 드러나는 정치적 함의를 띠는 그런 뉴스 보도를 하고 있었고요. 그래서 지금부터 여러분께 보여드리고 싶은 거는 아주 공식적인 소스라고 그런 자료라고 사용되는 것들이 어떻게 사용이 되고 어떻게 보여지는지 그리고 그것이 어떤 식으로 문제가 되고 그 문제라고 함은 그러니까 국가주의와 어떤 삼정주의를 뉴스 미디어를 통해서 보도를 만들어내고 그것에 함의되어 있는 정치적인 의미에 대해서 한번 얘기를 해보겠습니다.
Okay, first we're going to take a look at a clip from Jon Stewart. He does a satire show on CNN, and he's going to talk about a journalist named Judy Miller who used to work for the New York Times. She wrote articles about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. She was their high-level Washington correspondent, and what the Bush administration did was use her to plant information in her stories that would appear in the New York Times. And then they say, when they go on a TV show, they say, oh, it said so in the New York Times. And you're going to see Vice President Dick Cheney do just that here.
그래서 지금부터 또 보여드릴 얘기는요, 이 주디 밀러라는 워싱턴 주재 기자가 워싱턴에서 이라크 주재 기자로 간 사람의 어떤 개인적인 이야기를 뉴욕타임즈에서 그 이라크 전쟁에 관해서 보도를 할 때 사용을 했고, 다시 그 이야기를 CNN에서 보도를 했는데 이렇게 뭐라고 객관적으로 증명되지 않은 이야기를 뉴욕타임즈에서 말하기를 하는 식의 어떤 한 단계를 거쳐서 얘기를 하면서 정치적인 부시 정부의 정치적인 어떤 프로파간다로 미디어가 사용된 어떤 예를 하나 보여드리겠습니다.
This is a well-known political satire television show in the United States, a little bit left of center.
Listen, President Obama has had some national security success overseas via helping NATO topple Gaddafi, finding and killing Osama bin Laden, and of course the lesser-known finding and killing of Walter. All right. By the way, great to look at. Where's Walter's body? You look in there. Walter's Walter, remember? Dead. Look the body back. All right, you can go back later. But it is not Obama's security successes that have to upset. But it's that we know so much about these successes. The administration is being accused of a lack of damaging security leaks to burnish their own reputation. And this is the problem.
This is the problem. These leaks, especially the kind of leaks that are being investigated now by not one, but two special prosecutors, they are truly injurious to the national security. They jeopardize our security as a nation. They make it harder to implement foreign policy.
They are jeopardizingly injurious. Thank you, Judy Miller, formerly of the...
She was fired. She was fired.
Show how an example of these injurious leaks could be used.
This is the important part.
Let's see some examples from September 8, 2002. Let's say somebody in the Bush administration wants the public to believe that Saddam Hussein is actively reconstituting his nuclear weapons of mass destruction program. We'll call that guy Vice President. The administration would leak that information about the nuclear reconstitution to a high-ranking New York Times reporter. Let's call that person
So this is a headline that she did for the New York Times. That's her article in the New York Times. Front page, many times on the front page.
There's a story in the New York Times this morning.
See.
This is, and I want to attribute the Times. He now is trying, through his illicit procurement network, to acquire the equipment he needs to be able to enrich uranium. A little bit too.
Okay. So what Dick Cheney did, what the Bush administration did, is they would have maybe his assistant, somebody from his office, meets with Judy Miller, tells her Iraq, Saddam Hussein is building weapons of mass destruction. It's a strong source that she has, and it's very sensational information. She writes a story about that. She's a senior reporter at the New York Times. It's front page news. A lot of people are going to read about that, right? And what it's done is news that was manufactured by the administration of George W. Bush, and that particular news was instrumental in gathering support for the war in Iraq. The New York Times is a legacy news organization. It's a top-level news organization. It has its own wire service. So other newspapers all over the United States are going to take that story and print it in their newspapers. It's It's not just the New York Times. And then other journalists will read that news and they'll say, Saddam Hussein is trying to build weapons of mass destruction, blah, 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 reports the New York Times. And so that became the truth, even though after the invasion took place, they found no weapons of mass destruction. And it was discovered later that that was absolutely false.
그래서 지금 보여드린 것처럼 그 주디 밀러라는 기자가 결국에는 그 부시 정부, 행정 정부로부터 사담 후세인이 그 강력한 웨폰을 만들고자 하는 그런 사담 후세인이 사담 후세인이 강력한 무기를 만들고 이것을 준비하고 있다라는 식의 보도 자료를 주고 주디 밀러가 그것을 뉴욕타임즈의 헤드라인 기사로 그것을 보도를 하게 된 거죠. 그리고 뉴욕타임즈와 같은 매체는 그 미국 내에서 가장 그 영향력 있는 매체로 뉴욕타임즈에서 보도가 되고 나면 결국에 미국 전역에 있는 다른 조그마한 매체들이 뉴욕타임즈 기사를 그대로 받아서 다시 그것을 사용을 하고 그 아래 뉴욕타임즈에서 보도가 됐다고 사용한다고 표기는 하게 되겠지만 결국에는 뉴욕타임즈가 일면에 이렇게 중요하게 보도된 내용은 전역에 십시일반으로 이렇게 확장돼서 전혀 확인되지 않은 채 그 내용이 보도가 된다는 것을 뜻하고 그렇게 확장된 뉴스 자체가 결국에는 그 당시에 이라크 전쟁을 부추기게 된 하나의 원인이 되지 않았나. 그리고 결국에는 진실이 무엇든지 간에 이후에 사담 후세인이 그렇게까지 했다고, 그러니까 그것이 잘못된 보도임을 밝혀졌지만은 당시에는 그런 분위기를 몰아가는 것에 이렇게 미디어가 사용되었다는 점이 중요한 것입니다.
Okay, now one of the things that took place in the Iraq War was that instead of allowing journalists, the U.S. military, instead of allowing journalists to just run around and cover the news as they wanted, they embedded journalists with different units of the military. So the journalists would travel with particular military forces. So they'd be less inclined to report very objectively. Whereas in the Vietnam War, journalists just went everywhere, and what happened was the presentation of news that was shown to the American public created negative images and negative feelings in the American public of how the war in Vietnam was going, and it caused a tremendous decline in support for the war in Vietnam. And so the American administration, the American government and its military didn't want that to happen again. So they had the journalists what's called embedded with different units. And another sort of aspect of this is how they can control the news by doing that. And this next clip, we're going to see sort of how that's managed and shaped into a really a perfect news story.
이라크 전쟁 당시에 보도된 자료들을 비교를 하자 치면 베트남 전쟁과 비교를 할 수가 있는데요. 베트남 전쟁 당시에는 기자들이 베트남 전역에 들어가서 그 뉴스에 대해서 취재를 하고 보도를 하여 사실상 베트남 전쟁이 진행되는 동안에 미국 대중들에게는 전쟁의 굉장히 나쁜 이미지들이 그대로 보여지게 되고 그래서 전쟁은 나쁜 것이다라는 그런 신적인 그런 움직임을 변화를 가지게 하는 일조를 하였다면 반하여 이라크 전쟁 당시에는 이 각각의 부대의 주요 기자들을 심었다고 표현하시거든요. 심어서 그 부대와 함께 이라크 전쟁을 이라크로 보내게 되었고 그래서 어떤 객관적인 취재보다는 아주 정부에서 원하는 방식의 취재와 보도를 하게 되어 그런 식의 뉴스 보도 자체를 정부에서 컨트롤했다고 볼 수가 있습니다.
First, while various units created diversions around Nasiriyah, a group came to the hospital to rescue me.
That is her testimony, and this is the tape.
I'm right. Clear, all right.
You are looking at never-before-seen video of that daring nighttime rescue. It was posted by the website liveleak.com. On the extraordinary tape, armored vehicles and at least one tank drive up to the hospital Lynch was taken to after she was captured by Iraqi forces. After U.S. troops enter the building,
We see for the first time the young Army private turned prisoner of war, lying on a bed, apparently unguarded. We can only imagine what she is thinking. This week, she recalled that moment.
Then a soldier came into the room. He tore the American flag from his uniform.
The real story. This
and
is
he
the
handed
real
it to
story.
me in my
Here it
hand.
says.
And he told me,
Real
we're
story.
American soldiers, and we're here to take you home. And I looked at him and I said, yes, I'm an American soldier too.
In that hospital room, Lynch is asked a question.
Are you in any danger?
The next sequence shows what happened when Lynch heard the sound of gunfire from outside.
Where's those windows go out to, Eric? It's okay, it's me.
Clearly frightened, Lynch, who spent several days in that hospital with multiple injuries, is then stabilized on a stretcher, carried down several flights of stairs. Then, rushed into a military helicopter. The first step in her long trip home, and an even longer journey for her story to be told. Jessica Lynch says she's not a hero, but it's clear from these images she is a hero. As are the Americans who saved her.
Okay, that's a pretty glowing presentation of the American forces' behavior in Iraq, and very patriotic. It would play very well to an American audience, but is it accurate? That's another question.
지금 보신 그 비디오 자료는 그 제시카 린치라는 이라크 전쟁에서 참전 병사에 대한 얘기인데 사실 언뜻 보기에 굉장히 이 병사를 하나의 영웅으로 만드는 그런 감동적인 자료 같아 보이지만 지금 여기에서 얘기하는 그런 내용들이 얼마나 정확한지에 대해서 우리는 생각해 볼 필요가 있습니다.
The image of war is now created by military and political powers. Television's job is to translate it into mythology. Everybody remembers Jessica Lynch.
They made a movie out of
The
this
19-year-old private captured in an ambush and rescued by American Special Forces. The story started like this.
With that, I'll take your questions. Tom.
Brooks, we noticed that you made no mention of the rescue of Jessica Lynch and the special operations that went on. We understand that there is video taken by a combat camera team. Can you show us that video?
We did have the opportunity to have a combat camera crew with the assault force, and we'll show you only the portion that has a PFC Lynch being retrieved. We have to take.
Incredibly, the cassette was already cued in the VCR, and the commentary was prepared.
We were successful in that operation last night and did retrieve PFC Jessica Lynch, bringing her away from that location of danger.
This single video clip, produced and directed by the Army, is the only document of Private Lynch's rescue. The basis of a story that developed over 7 months. ABC, the same day.
Which means Army Rangers would secure the perimeter of the
TV runs
That's
the story
expensive.
with a dramatic 3D animation
graphics?
based on unnamed sources.
They love that.
CBS, the same day.
Military post that had been Lynch's uncomfortable home for 10 long days. We just arrived here at Saddam Hospital. It was here she lay suffering from 2 broken legs, a broken arm, and multiple gunshot wounds, being treated not by a doctor, but by an Iraqi pharmacist.
Now it's serious wounds and incompetent doctors. CBS doesn't name their sources either.
The Pentagon says she is the first American prisoner of war to be rescued from hostile territory since World War II.
The headline in the Washington Post, she was fighting to the death. In it, Private First Class Lynch is portrayed as a kind of Rambo. The source, U.S. officials.
April 12th. Jessica Lynch is a certified hero and a media celebrity. 600 articles have been written about her. Television networks compete for an interview. MTV offers her a show. Her agent negotiates $1 million book deal, and NBC prepares a television movie, Saving Private Lynch.
It's very important to us as Americans to bring back our fellow soldiers. But most importantly is to bring back somebody like Private First Class Lynch, who was risking her life on the battlefield.
1 month later, journalists arrive at Saddam Hospital without a military escort. Their investigation turns the story on its head.
Private Lynch hadn't been shot in a firefight, as earlier reports suggested.
ABC, May 7th.
Who had broken her leg when her truck overturned. An orthopedic surgeon who was due to set Private Lynch's broken leg the following morning says U.S. soldiers put a gun to his head as they burst into the operating room.
We started shouting, "We are electors, don't shoot."
The hospital staff says there were no Iraqi troops on the premises when the Americans rushed in. They had all left the morning before the rescue. The soldiers broke down doors in the intensive care unit, and they could have just asked where she was. Private Lynch has yet to give her own account of her captivity here or her rescue. She remains in seclusion at the Army's Walter Reed Hospital, reportedly suffering from amnesia.
Okay, we're not going to show this. So what you had in the second clip of the Jessica Lynch rescue was the truth, that the hospital didn't represent really a danger. There was a doctor, a trained physician that was going to fix her broken leg that got broken when the truck she was driving overturned, not in a firefight. Later in this clip, it mentions that she didn't fire a shot. Her gun jammed, and she didn't fire a shot at anybody. And as it mentioned there, the hospital was open. They could have just come in and picked her up. They didn't have to come in sort of guns blazing, as one would say. So it was really presented initially by the U.S. military a lot different than the actual facts of the story.
그래서 이 데이빗 린치라는 일병이 이라크에 잡혀갔다가 포로가 되었다가 다시 미국 군에 의해서 구출이 된다라는 어떤 영웅적인 이야기가 처음에 뉴스로 보도가 되었지만 그 후에 또 다시 보도된 자료들을 보시면 처음 이 일병이 구출이 되었을 때 병원에서 맨 처음에 보도를 했었을 때 다리가 부러졌고 뭐 그때는 총을 발사를 했었고 뭐 하는 식의 얘기가 있었지만 그 후에는 다시 총을 발사한 적이 없다라는 등 그러니까 그 이야기가 계속 불일치하는 것이죠. 처음에 미국 군에서 보도됐던 내용과 후에 다시 한번 밝혀진 내용이 불일치함으로써 결국에는 이 내용이 미국 군이 만들었던 어떤 하나의 한 명의 영웅을 만들어내서 미국 군에 대한 얘기를 하기 위한 만들어진 이야기다라는 것을 알 수 있습니다.
Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about the sort of ongoing revolution that's taking place in news media. It's not all bad news like I seem to have presented here. On the brighter side, you have WikiLeaks, and you might remember a couple of stories related to them. One is a previous release of documents and information and video by a military person named Bradley Manning, who's been arrested in the United States. He's charged, he's been held in jail in the United States. And he released a video of an American helicopter gunship killing journalists accidentally. They thought that they were insurgents. They were just carrying a camera. If you carry a camera over your shoulder like this, they thought it was a weapon. Right? And then other people with them were carrying weapons, and they were guards from a nearby mosque. They weren't insurgents. They weren't shooting at the people in the helicopter. They were just walking around looking to take pictures of the war taking place. And the soldiers in the helicopter asked permission to engage them, to shoot them. And they have footage of them killing these journalists. The U.S. military held on to that footage. And then this one person named Bradley Manning said, this is news that should get out. And he released it, and it became a big problem for the U.S. military and a problem for maintaining support for its wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Another person recently did a similar thing, a fellow named Edward Snowden, who's now in I think the international wing of the Moscow airport. He released. Yeah, I think so. The last thing I heard was that he was
suspended.
Yeah, in kind of a no man's land in an international airport, looking for a country that will accept him. What he did was I'm not sure if he released the documents, but he just stated that he knew of all this behavior that the U.S. military, or the U.S. government, was undertaking in terms of surveillance. This was discussed recently on the news by a couple of Guardian editors who were talking about this issue and how ideally the government would like to capture every bit of data, every bit of electronic information that's communicated from one person to another. Ideally, the government wants to capture that information, and it wants to look at that information for any threat to the government. And what Mr. Snowden did was he uncovered ways in which the U.S. government was doing this through his work. It was his job, really, to do that, and ways in which that they were looking at Facebook and different social media networks and gathering information and surveilling people through that electronic information. So the divulgence of these news stories by what I'll call alternative guerrilla journalism can force the mainstream agenda to address those issues. Here in South Korea, you have, for example, Minerva. Right? Remember Minerva? Minerva. Okay. He was writing in probably not very prominent news media, but because he got such a huge following and because he had such accuracy, eventually the mainstream had to address the issue. They had to tell that story. Okay, you can just give a summary of that. Sorry, I went on very long.
그래서 이제 마지막으로 드리고 싶은 예는 어떤 위키릭스와 같은 예인데요. 이를테면은 미국에서 이라크 전쟁이 한참일 때 미국 헬리콥터가 이렇게 정찰을 다니다가 그 카메라를 들고 있는 저널리스트를 카메라가 아닌 무기를 들고 있는 사람을 착각을 해서 저널리스트를 죽인 사건이 있었고요. 그러한 사건을 브래들리 매닝이라는 사람이 폭로를 하게 됐고 그것이 이제 문제가 되었던 거죠. 그리고 뭐 그와 같은 식으로 사실상 많은 SNS인지 일반 개인적으로 어떤 정보들이 다 이렇게 다니고 있지만 흘러다니고 있지만 그것을 정부는 끊임없이 컨트롤하고 싶어 한다는 거입니다. 하지만 동시에 그것이 폭로가 되면 어쨌든 보도를 할 수밖에 없는 그런 상황이 있는데요. 한국에서는 가장 유명한 잘 알려진 예가 그 미네르바 사건이겠죠. 네. 그래서 비록 그런 개인적인 그런 블로그라든지 SNS에서 어떤 사실들을 얘기할 때 훈련된 사람들만큼이나 아주 정확하고 잘 짜임새 있는 보도를 하진 않지만 어쨌든 그런 정보들이 계속해서 흘러나오고 영향을 받게 되면 또 정부에서는 그것을 보도할 수밖에 없는 그런 상황에 대치되는 그런 것들을 우리는 목격할 수가 있습니다.
Okay, I just want to talk a little bit now about my work as a foreign correspondent and the challenges that foreign correspondents here in South Korea face. I mentioned the sort of problems with the market. So in South Korea, I'm a member of the Seoul Foreign Correspondents Club. It's often, or it's called by some of the journalists as the Seoul Correspondents Club of Korean journalists that work for foreign news organizations, because there are very few actual foreigners that are here reporting international news. It's mostly Koreans reporting international news. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. Number one is it requires that the Korean journalists, if they're working for an international news organization, usually they have to speak English. Right? And myself, if somebody can speak English better than him or better than him, I tend not to trust them very much, okay, in Korea. Because if you can speak English really well in Korea, there's a couple of possibilities. You study really hard, independently, by yourself. That's a possibility. The other possibility is that you were sent to a Hagwon a lot when you were young, right? And you studied really hard. And then another possibility is, if your English is really good, that you were sent overseas by your parents, who are probably wealthy. So for me, when I talk to people, and my impression of Korean, my thinking of my predisposition, my prejudice of a Korean that speaks English really, really well, is that they came from a wealthy family. And so they're going to have a certain perspective on the news that's different from the ordinary Korean person.
그래서 저는 지금 여기 한국 주재 이란 방송국에서 일을 하는 특파원으로서 어떤 서울에 와 있는 보도 매체들의 특파원들과 같이 모여서 어떤 그룹을 모임을 갖는 그런 멤버이기도 한데요. 특징은 서울에는 생각보다 외국인 특파원이 많지가 않고 오히려 한국 사람 특파원이 더 많다는 것이고 그것이 참 좀 이상하게 생각이 될 수도 있을 텐데요. 어쨌든 개인적으로 서울에서 이렇게 여러 가지 사건들을 보도해서 자료를 보내는 특파원으로서 저는 영어를 잘하는 사람을 사실은 믿지를 않습니다. 왜냐하면 영어를 잘하는 사람은 아마도 공부를 열심히 했거나 어렸을 적에 유학이나 비싼 공부를 학원으로 보내셨었을 경우가 가장 많고, 그 의미는 이 친구들이, 이 영어를 잘하는 사람들이 부유한 그런 계층의 가족, 자식의 경우가 더 많고, 그렇다면 어떤 객관적인 이야기를 들을 수 있다기보다는 좀 치우쳐진 어떤 이야기를 들을 수 있다는 경우가 더 많다고 생각됩니다.
Most of the time they'll be working behind the scenes, and they'll be doing what's called fixing, which is helping design the news frame, communicating what stories should be covered and what stories maybe aren't that interesting. So they do have an extraordinary amount of power in terms of what news subjects are covered.
그래서 또한 특파원으로서 이야기를 보도를 할 때 그 교정 작업이 굉장히 큰 중요한 과정 중에 하나인데요. 특정 뉴스를 보도를 할 때 어떤 것이 더 흥미가 있을 것이고 어떤 것을 보여줘야 할지 골라내는 작업이 바로 이 교정 작업을 할 수 있습니다.
Okay, another couple other challenges are that smaller outlets can't have a foreign correspondent in South Korea. They don't have enough money. Really simple. So they rely on the wire services, Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, right? And those are large organizations owned by other big companies, or if it's Associated Press, it has a very American perspective. And so those smaller news outlets don't get news from original sources. They're from managed sources with a particular perspective. The other issue is the correspondents that are in South Korea are generally from large news organizations that are owned by other big companies that are generally financially vested in the news they produce and generally conservative in their political orientation.
그래서 지금 일하고 계신 프레스 TV의 특파원으로서 사실상 어려운 점은 어떤 그 오리지널 소스를 만들고 취재하기 위한 재원이 턱없이 부족하다는 건데요. 그렇기 때문에 이와 같이 조그만 보도국 같은 경우는 로이터라든지 블룸버그라든지 연합뉴스 같은 그런 자료들을 얻어다가 그것을 그대로 사용하는 수밖에 없을 테고요. 또한 사실상 한국에 와 있는 많은 특파원들은 큰 매체에 특파원인 경우가 많고요. 큰 매체라고 하면 특정 회사가 사주고 있는 그런 방송국이기 때문에 물론 아주 넉넉하게 보도들을 할 수 있겠지만 동시에 그것이 굉장히 그 컨serva티브한 그런 뷰를 가지고 있을 수밖에 없다라고 생각합니다.
Okay, I'm sorry this kind of got extended because I forgot about the times for translation. Okay, so just lastly, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, or sort of my ambitions. I really miss producing journalism on a regular basis. Right now, I'm just a part-time radio correspondent for Radio Television Hong Kong, something I've been doing for many years, and I'm studying. As I mentioned, after I finish that, I plan to get back into journalism, and my goal is to continue to teach a little bit and then do freelance journalism on the side where I can write news that I really want to write myself. I say, because broadcast news generally is 1.5 to 2 minutes long for a story. That's less than 300 words. That's not very much information. And it's very infotainment oriented. So I think that as a text journalist, you have a much vaster range of information and subject that you can present. And as a freelancer, just producing, one sort of feature report and trying to place that report in an international newspaper or online source, you might have a little bit more freedom to do different subjects and a little bit more influence than if you work for one organization and they tend to impose on you the stories that they want you to do. So that's my plan after I finish my hopefully my last degree.
오늘 이렇게 총회까지 같이 진행이 되기 때문에 시간을 좀 더 염두를 했었어야 되는데, 어쨌든 마지막으로 한 말씀 드리자면, 지금은 사실상 약간 저널리즘에서 좀 멀리 떨어져 있는 상태라고 할 수가 있는데, 말씀드렸듯이 그냥 파트타임으로 일을 하고 있고, 그리고 동시에 공부를 하고 있기 때문입니다. 하지만 장차 앞으로는 프리랜서 저널리스트로 더 활동을 하고 싶은데요. 사실상 이 일을 하면서 한정된 시간에 1분 30초에서 2분 사이에 하나의 이슈를 300단어 정도로 함축해서 보여주는 어떤 정보 매체이기 때문에 그것에 대해서 얘기를 할 수 있는 것이 굉장히 한정적일 수밖에 없습니다. 그래서 저는 관심을 가지는 것이 글을 쓰거나 한 가지 주제에 관해서 더 심층적으로 보도를 하고 그것을 전달을 할 수 있는 그런 매체에 더 관심을 많이 가지고 있고요. 프리랜서로서 그런 것들을 만들어내고 취재를 하고, 그래서 그것이 그러한 소식이 조금 더 영향을 끼칠 수 있는 그런 저널리스트가 되는 것이 꿈입니다. 오늘 감사합니다.
이 강의 되게 집중해 주셔서 감사하고요. 지금 이제 남은 시간 동안 같이 이제 저희가 제가 보는 관점에서의 뉴스에서 일어나는 문제들에 대해서 좀 같이 얘기를 좀 나눠봤으면 좋겠습니다. 먼저 이제 Frank, how do you feel that you make news time and there's some pressure, or any pressure you're some controlling your perspective?
Sure. Well, I'll talk about a couple of things. One is time pressure, and what I would do is when I would do a story for press television, I would send them an email and I'd describe the story in 1 or 2 sentences, two or 3 sentences, and they'd send me back yes or no. And from the time they say yes, there would be music in my head, and the music would be because I want to get it done fast. You're under tremendous pressure to get that done fast. Now, before online media came along, there was a deadline for your newspaper, right? Or for your broadcast news television program. Like at 6 o'clock, the news comes on. In South Korea, the big news time is 9 o'clock, right? So at 9 o'clock, the news comes on. You've got to have your work done by 8 o'clock, right? But now that it's online, it's always a deadline. You've got to get it on there ASAP, or somebody else is going to beat you to it.
Yes, I make artwork, and I might make artwork in the Korea a few months ago. Yeah, the Korean Peninsula had emergency. Yeah, in time, and then at that time we want some special report from me. Yeah. So why they sending the money?
Okay. Well, I've been working for Press TV for quite a few years. I hosted my own talk show for them for about 3 months, and I didn't get a lot of feedback from them. News organizations are very large, and they have to produce a lot of material, so they don't have a chance really to develop their talent very much. As I mentioned to you, I didn't have hardly any experience before I started broadcasting. So I had this program, and I just had one conversation where somebody at Press TV said, "Oh, you're not critical enough of the boss or the big manager of Press TV, the president said, you're not critical enough of American foreign policy." And I thought, wow, really? And then I just kind of ignored it, and I kept doing what I was doing. But apparently, you know, I didn't get a lot of feedback about that. But apparently that's something that they were quite concerned about. Recently, or over the past year or so, I guess 8 months, the correspondent that I've been working with, Joseph Kim, has been producing the news, and he's more neutral than I am. You probably have an idea of what I've, given what I presented here today and the tone of my remarks, where I am on the political spectrum and where I am in terms of my feelings about, let's say, American foreign policy. I'm pretty critical of American foreign policy, generally speaking. And I had been doing that for Press TV, but not enough to suit them. And that was also the case with Joseph. And so Tehran, Press TV in its headquarters in Tehran, the capital of Iran, they sent a correspondent here to encourage Joseph and myself to be more anti-American. And Joseph didn't feel it was his position as a journalist to be anti-American. That's more activism or activist journalism, which is a branch of journalism, but it's not a branch that I would really advocate. And so he decided, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was kind of committed as a producer. What I tried to do with Joseph was to step away and to let him produce the news, to not be editorial involved anymore. I wanted to just kind of be the producer, manager, assistant, sort of equipment provider, facilitator, not involved in the editorial content, right? So when they sent this fellow here, where is he? Here he is, Ramin Nazahari. He's Iranian American. He was sent here, again, to encourage us to be more anti-American. And so he was going to do reports as well. This is another problem with international journalism. This is what's called a parachute journalist. Somebody that just flies in, they jump out of a parachute, land in a place, don't know anything about it, report on that place for 2 weeks, and then they fly out of the place again. Right? So this is what Ramin did here. And I produced his news, and it was really kind of farcical because he imposed an anti-American news frame on every single package that he did. He managed to shape it to be able to say something bad about the United States. For example, when there was talk about, or he found out that there were resources in North Korea, that maybe China was interested in mining. China's interested in mining resources in North Korea. There's a little bit of interest here in South Korea. So Ramin said, aha, the United States is going to invade North Korea. And he presented that idea in a news package or two as if it was some type of possibility. I, as critical of American foreign policy as I am, I don't think that they're likely to invade North Korea to capture their mining resources anytime soon. So I kind of decided at that point that I didn't want to be producing Press TV anymore.
혹시 지금 통역 없이 이렇게 불러가는 게 괜찮습니까? 대화가 끊길까봐 이렇게 하는데 불편하시면은 관진 씨가 다시 도와드립니다.
네, 중간중간에 해주시면
If you have any questions too, please.
아주 짤막하게 말씀을 드리자면 그 프레스 TV에서 일을 하시면서 그 본사로부터 이란 본사로부터 자꾸 압박을 받았던 것 중에 하나가 그 미국의 그런 외교 정책을 비판하는 그런 감각이 모자라지 않냐, 비판하는 의식이 모자란 것 같다라는 압박을 굉장히 받았고 그런 얘기에 굉장히 동의할 수 없고 쉽게 말해 짜증이 많이 나셨었는데요. 그러면서 계속해서 본인이 저널리스트로서 원하는 그런 자세를 계속 유지하다 보니까 본사에서 지금 이 화면에도 보이는 그 라민이라는 기자를 이곳으로 파견을 해서 같이 일을 하게 했고요. 이 라민이라는 기자는 본사 이란 TV에서 본사에서 원하는 대로 그 미국을 굉장히 비판적으로 바라볼 수 있는 그런 바라보고자 하는 목소리를 가진 그런 기자로서 특히나 이 보도를 할 때 자료를 만들어낼 때 이 프레임
질문이 있는데 프레스 TV의 관객을 누구라고 선정한 것입니까?
Their audience is, I would say Iranians outside of Iran. It's not broadcast widely within Iran, but I would say Iranians outside of Iran or people that want a different perspective of their news. Press TV has a very different perspective on the news. It is very critical of American policy. That's really one of the reasons that it exists, and that's one of the reasons why France 24 was created, why Russia Today was created, why NHK was created, why Al Jazeera especially was created, because there's a dominance in the international news a decade ago of CNN and BBC. They had really dominated international news coverage, and that's an empowering thing if you have that domination, and Press TV didn't like that. Also, they don't like the presentation of their nuclear programs, their nuclear science development as a nuclear weapons program, which is how it's presented in the American press. They argue that their nuclear program is for medical purposes and for energy purposes. So that's another reason that Press TV was created.
그래서 프레스 TV 자체의 특정 관객을 생각하기보다는 어떻게 이런 방송이 생겨나게 되는지 좀 더 큰 배경을 보게 되면 이해하기 쉬울 텐데요. 이를테면 10년 전만 하더라도 BBC나 CNN 같은 매체가 그 국제 정세, 국제 보도 매체로 모든 것을 장악하고 있었기 때문에 BBC와 CNN에 보도되는 내용들만 한정적인 정보를 우리가 제공을 받았던 거죠. 그래서 그거에 짜증이 난 다른 국가들이 이를테면 프랑스 24, CCTV, 러시아 투데이 뭐 이런 식의 방송 매체를 만들어냈던 것이고 프레스 TV 역시 같은 의도로 CNN과 BBC에서 이를테면 핵에 관련해서 보도를 하는 것을 이렇게 한정적으로 보도를 하는, 그러니까 그게 결국엔 국가에서 그 방송 매체를 소유하고 있는 국가의 정치 외교와 전 관계가 아주 맞물려 있기 때문에 그런 것에 반하는 이란의 자치적인 그런 방송 매체로 생겨났다고 그것을 이해하시는 게 더 맞을 듯합니다.
그리고 좀 추가적으로 이 라민에 대한 개인적인 어떤 신상에 관해서 조금 아시면 좀 작업을 이해하는 전체적인 상황을 좀 쉽게 하실 수 있을 것 같아서 말씀을 드리면, 인터뷰 영상에서도 나와 있지만 라민은 이란에서 태어나서 미국에서 성장하고 그 프랑스에서 일을 하고 있으면서 한국에 파견을 온 거예요. 그래서 어떻게 보면 우리 입장에서 보면 프로파간다를 생산하는, 그러니까 자기는 프로파간다적이라고 이해하지 않으면 프로파간다라고 해요. 그렇게 그런 데서 일을 하는데 정작 자기는 자기 시츄에이션이 어떤지 정확하게 이해를 해요. 그래서 코카콜라 좋아하고 밥 먹고 나면 꼭 후식을 단조를 먹어야 돼요. 그리고 나서 락밴드를 또 가면 따로 하고 있고, 그래서 거기서 일하는 게 월급을 자기가 가지고 있는 가능성에서 가장 월급을 많이 받을 수 있고 회피한 이유 때문에 하는 거죠. 정확하게 자기가 뭘 하고 있는지 정확하게 알고 있다는 거예요. 네, 그래서 뉴스를 가장 합리적이고 자기 입장에서 합리적이라는 건 빨리 만들 수 있는 걸 얘기하는 거예요. 빨리 쉽게 원하게 만들 수 있는 방향으로 뉴스를 만들어내는데, 그 표면적인 내용들을 보면, 그러니까 이제 깊숙한 내용들 말고 그냥 북한이나 특히 이 뉴스는 한 달 사이에 만들어진 겁니다. 근데 북한이라는 이런 뉴스를 표면적으로 봤을 때는 그 들어가는 단어 테스팅만 보면 어느 정도 납득이 갈 수도 있을 가능성이 굉장히 크다는 거예요. 무슨 이해하시겠죠? 되게 그러니까 그 다른 시각을 가지고 있는 한국의 사람들이 보면 얘는 진짜 공정하게 보일 수도 있는 가능성이 되게 큰 거예요. 그런 좀 재밌는 단층들이 사실은 깔려 있는 상황이죠. 네.
또 다른 질문인데 한국에 와 있는 다른 해외 방송들 1위의 정치는 어떻게 운영됩니까? 예를 들어 우리나라에서는 아리랑이 KBS의 대안이 될 줄 알았다가 아리랑과 연합통신이 그지가 돼가지고 더 이상 안 봅니다만, 그렇다면 와 있는 다른 해외 통신원들끼리 안에서 생산해내는 정치들은 서로 어떻게 좀 조율을 해가는지 교류가 있습니까? 네.
기본적으로 SFCC가 저 언론 재단에 있는데 그 시설이 있죠.
Politics of the
Yes.
Well,
is there any interrelationship between those foreign correspondents situated in Korea? Because we know that Arirang TV was regarded as a kind of alternative to Korea broadcasting system, but now it's no more. It's serving totally under the national broadcast. And then what else? There were some other interesting alternative guerrilla, whatever, informal networks that is no more. Of course, we do have some internet formal networks, but media, 뭐죠? Oh My News, which is our favorite.
They had some in English. Oh My News has kind of abandoned its English a little
I
bit
know.
too.
So we are wondering if there works some kind of interpolitical sort of relationship between the foreign correspondents situated in Korea. It's not only Press TV. So like you said, is it just a social club, or they are discussing about some politics of representation?
What the SFCC is as a foreigner, to get your media card, you need to be a member of the SFCC. They organize it like with COSIS, I think it's called, is the governing body of media in South Korea. And as a foreigner, you have to be a member of the SFCC. What the SFCC does is it basically they inform. There's 3 people that are working in the office to manage it. Okay, and about 250 to 300 members. As I mentioned, most of them are actually Koreans working for foreign news organizations as opposed to foreigners. And what they do is they organize sometimes guests to come to the SFCC and speak. People in government and newsmakers. For example, Bak Won-soon has been there, of course, and Bak Geun-hye has been there. And every president and mayor of Seoul goes there. Ministry officials, they have come and speak. In addition, whenever there's a news event that takes place, they organize what's called a pool. So if there's going to be, let's say, President Barack Obama comes and he's going to meet with Bak Geun-hye, they're going to, not every journalist that wants to be in that meeting shooting some video of the meeting or even the news conference is going to be able to get in there. Because there's going to be 1,000 journalists that want to get in there, right? And they don't have the facilities to organize that. So they just allow 3 or 4 foreign journalists to get in there, and then they share their information. They share that material with all the other members that want it. And that's another function of the SFCC. And I use those emails. I get these emails from them about speakers coming. Sometimes I go and see the speakers. Sometimes I'll just be alerted. Oh, Obama's coming. He's coming on this day. He's probably going to be speaking on that day. So it'll save me some time in terms of news gathering. But as far as having some political affiliations with other news organizations in South Korea, they really don't. There is some, on the bright side of things, there are some foreigners in South Korea that are developing websites that deal with South Korean news quite a bit. The Marmot Hole is one. It's called the Marmot Hole, and it's quite well known. It's a blog, but it's a very, very active blog. Yeah, Marmot Hole. It's run by a fellow named Robert Kohler, who also works for, I think, Seoul magazine. That's his real job, and then he runs the Marmot Hole on the side, and he's done that for many years. I don't agree with his political orientation as it comes out, but he's very prolific in his coverage of affairs here, and other people have tried to do similar things like that. And I wanted to start a website. I have a ghost site up, but it takes a lot of time to cover news, and it's difficult to find an audience. It's a big challenge. One of the things that
You're so huge, brother.
Me? Yeah, not really. But I try to be. I pretend to be.
말씀하신 것처럼 여기 와 있는 그 외국 방송국의 특파원들끼리
A little bit on the news that gets presented out of South Korea. And this is one thing that kind of really disappoints me. I've lived in South Korea for quite a number of years now. And the story that's presented in the international press of South Korea is about North Korea. The majority of news that international organizations present on South Korea is related to North Korea. If it's not related to North Korea, I don't get a phone call from a radio television phone call. It has to be pretty huge for me to get a phone call about news that does not involve North Korea. And that's represented here. If you look at this stuff, UN, North Korea, battleships headed here, North Korea. That's what it is. That's what the international news organizations demand. And the perspective of North Korea isn't governed by, the perspective of South Korea. What's happening in South Korea isn't really presented accurately in the international news media because that presentation is managed by the receiver, not the source. So somebody in Atlanta is deciding what news they want out of Korea. Not reality, it's what Atlanta wants. For example, I managed to do a story that was not on North Korea, and it was about the Pyeongchang Olympics, about how South Korea was in the bid to win the Olympic Games. And we went to Pyeongchang to where the ski jump is, right? And there's a village there, there's not a big city there, and we were doing two stories for two different media organizations. And so South Korea won the bid, and we were there the next morning, and we had been up basically all night producing small news packages for, again, two different news organizations. And one of them called, and we were sending them this stuff, and they were like, get us this, get us that. And they said, can you get a picture, some video, and interview people sitting in a cafe, reading the newspaper, realizing that South Korea had won the Olympics, and their response to South Korea winning the Olympics. Now the village near the ski jump at the Pyeongchang, where most of the events are, doesn't have a Starbucks with a patio, okay? It's not Paris or Switzerland, all right? And they were really like trying to order up the news. So this is one of the real problems here. There are a whole bunch of other stories here in South Korea that have nothing to do with North Korea. Oh, absolutely. It's an amazing place. Just South Korea is an amazing place. If you look at the history without thinking about North Korea, just the fact of South Korea's development, number one, going from an impoverished nation in 1950 to a developed nation now. That no other country has had that kind of development. Secondly, its its technological development here. The technology and its use in your lives is different than any other place in the world, and it's at the forefront of many other places in the world. Those are two aspects that can really be talked about on many, many different levels in terms of international news coverage. and it's not done as much as it could be done. The other stories that take place here, the transition to democracy that took place in South Korea and is arguably still taking place, is another story that could really be developed further than it is in international media. But those stories are drowned out by North Korea.
지금 이 작품과 연관해서 말씀드리고 싶은 점은 여기서 보시는 것처럼 사실상 그런 해외 매체, 방송 매체에서 한국에 대해서 관심을 가지는 건 남한이 아니라 북한이라는 사실인 거죠. 그래서 사실상 북한에 대한 뉴스를 얘기하지 않고서는 한국에 대한 보도가 거의 없다고 보시면 되고요. 여기 계시면서, 특파원으로 계시면서 해외 매체에서 연락을 받을 때도 북한에 어떤 사건이 있을 때 그걸 취재하는 얘기 외에는 별다른 그런 독촉 전화라든지가 없습니다. 얼마 전에 평창 올림픽 관련해서 두 분이 함께 거기에 패키지를 만들어 취재를 하러 가셨었는데 이제 그곳에서 그러니까 평창에서 동계올림픽을 개최하기로 한 것이 결정이 되고 나서 아틀란타에서 있는 그런 방송국에서 이제 이곳의 소식을 전하기 위해서 아주 구체적으로 요구를 했던 사항은 그곳 평창에 있는 마을에 있는 카페에서 어떤 사람들이 이렇게 신문을 이렇게 읽으면서 그 소식을 접하는 기뻐하는 그 장면을 좀 찍어달라고 아주 직접적으로 요구를 했지만 사실상 평창은 이런 스타벅스 카페가 있는 그런 도심이 아니라 굉장히 한국의 강원도의 그런 시골인 것이죠. 근데 그런 것에 대한 이해는 전혀 없다라는 것을 지금 말씀드린 예에서도 아실 수 있듯이 결국에는 해외에 있는 그런 리시버들은 이런 여기 와 있는 특파원들이 만들어낸 자료를 받아서 그곳에서 보도를 하게 되는 그 방송 리시버들은 사실상 한국에 대해서 많이 알지도 못하고 크게 관심도 없는 것이 사실입니다. 오히려 북한에 되게 집중이 되어 있는 것이죠. 하지만 질문에서 한국을 많이 좋아하냐고 말씀을 하시니 개인적으로는 노스 코리아가 아니라 사우스 코리아 자체가 굉장히 주목할 만한 나라라고 생각을 한다고 말씀하셨고요. 꼽는 이유로는 어쨌든 1950년대 한국전쟁 이후로 지금까지 놀라운 경제 성장을 일으켰고 만들어냈고 그거 자체로도 놀랍고 두 번째로는 엄청나게 기술적인 발전이 일반적인 일상의 삶에 그대로 이렇게 다 스며 있고 그것이 계속해서 진행이 되는 진행 과정에 있는 얼마 안 되는 전 세계에서 어떤 그런 포프런트에 있는데 그런 모습도 굉장히 놀랍다고 하시고요. 또한 민주주의가 진행이 되어 온 과정도 흥미롭게 볼 수도 있고 여러 면에서 남한은 굉장히 매력적인 국가라고 생각합니다.
지상파 매체를 포함해서 다양한 뉴스 매체를 보실 텐데 어떤 매체마다 어떤 성격이나 왜냐면 저희는 아무래도 그런 세계 지상파의 주요 소비자고 수용자인데 이런 식으로 이제 보도를 하는 경우도 있을 테고 그리고 각 매체마다 어떤 성격이 있는지 그리고 어떻게 평가하실 때 객관적인 느낌이 드는 매체는 어떤 매체인지 혹시 말씀해 주실 수 있어요?
Okay, sorry, I'm at about 20% right now in my Korean understanding, so I'm still studying very hard, but I'll have to ask.
The question was, as a foreign correspondent living in South Korea, you see those media in South Korea that created evidence, and what do you think about each of their characteristics and maybe the most subjective media that you think among them?
That's tough. I would say, NBC did some good stuff with PD Notebook. I like that. Even though they crossed over the line a little bit on the Mad Cow thing, right? But I thought they did some good stuff. I met with one of the producers of PD Notebook and talked to him about media a bit. So I think they can do some good stuff. And they're also trying to, NBC also has some guys that they kicked out of NBC that are trying to do some online stuff that's quite interesting. SBS, they have the nicest building and equipment and everything. But as far as their perspective goes, it might be a little bit more objective than what you would see on KBS. But again, I'm just going from what I hear and what I read. I don't, I can't watch the news. I can't watch the Korean news and really make an informed judgment about where they're at in the political spectrum or in terms of their objectivity.
개인적으로 MBC의 PD 수첩이 굉장히 잘 하고 있다고, 물론 때에 따라서 여러 가지 변화가 있지만 어쨌든 PD 수첩이 제일 잘하고 있다고 생각을 하고요. 그리고 얼마 전에 MBC 노조 그 파업 사태가 있고 나서 거기에서 일부 나갔던 그 PD들이나 저널리스트들이 모여서 온라인에서 지금 움직임을 벌이고 있는데 그런 모습도 굉장히 흥미롭게 좋게 생각을 합니다. 그리고 SBS 같은 경우는 제일 훌륭한 시설을 갖추고 있고 제일 좋은 기계를 쓰고 있고 그래서 좋은 것 같고요.
More important than that is Yonhap News, because they have an English wire service. They have an English news website. Every foreign journalist in Korea reads that website. And it creates a kind of news frame that can lead a correspondent, oh, I'll do a story on this, because I can get all this information quickly. It's given me ideas for stories. Now, a survey was done of Yonhap News about whether it's objective or not, of the people that work at Yonhap News. And 66%, 2 out of 3 workers at Yonhap News think that Yonhap News is biased. It's not objective. And when you read it, you have to read between the lines to understand the perspective that comes across that news organization. That's the most important one in terms of foreign correspondence, is that one, and then the English media, the Korea Herald, again, Chojong Dongish, right, and then Korea Times, a little bit financially desperate. When you look at their website, it's really kind of busy, but a little bit more objective.
그리고 사실상 이렇게 여기 와 있는 해외 기자로서 제일 활용을 잘하고 있는 매체는 연합뉴스라고 할 수 있는데요. 연합뉴스는 어쨌든 영어로 된 그 보도 기사들이 그 즉각적으로 올라오고 있고, 그래서 거기서 많은 정보와 아이디어를 얻어서 어떤 기사를 쓰면 되겠다라는 거.
Because it's never be the objective report, 100% objective. And what is the purpose of news? What do you think about it?
Well, I agree. It's very difficult it's impossible for news to be objective. There's always a perspective, a viewpoint in presenting the news. My idea about making news is that I want to make news that drives public opinion. And then I want that public opinion to drive public policy. News is made to inform people about what is taking place in their society, so that those people can make informed decisions and informed behavior in ways that will change the problems that are uncovered through news media. So in the end, I want to drive public policy. I want to force the government to change whatever it's doing, or to correct whatever wrongs are taking place, or work toward correcting whatever wrongs are taking place ultimately. And the news is I guess a fair or egalitarian or democratic way of doing that. It's not you telling the government do this or do that, and stuffing some money in some politician's pocket. It's you presenting your own personal objective perspective of events to the public, and then they are making the decision to pressure government to make changes. That's how I think news functions, and that's my idea of how I would like news to function. My news to function, not Fox's news or Joe Jonas' news.
What do you think about blogging activity as a journalist or critics? Do you think it should be powerful or objective or reputable?
That's a whole other presentation. I talk a little bit about blogging in my classes, and it's very difficult to pinpoint the influence of blogging. A lot of things happen with blogs. Number one is, we can call it citizen journalism. One thing that happens is when a journalist writes an article, they're not an expert. They're going to talk to a couple of other people, right? If you take that subject matter and you open it up to social media, right, you could have, let's say you're doing an article on, the Four Rivers project pollution, right? And you might call up a couple of people, a couple of environmentalists, but then if you open that up to social media, and it can have far more contributors and far more information can get into your reporting. Some really good journalism I've seen will have quotations from people from alternative news media within mainstream media. Blogs on their own, I don't consider themselves influential. I find the way that alternative media can be influential is by forcing its agenda into the mainstream. As itself, it's like, a dog barking in the forest that nobody's hearing, right? But when it filters into the mainstream media, and when it has a broader base of information sharing, then I think it has greater influence.
Don't you think it can be pre-application for the, do you think it's possible to be pre-applicated by the...
Sure. What's happening in journalism is it's kind of ridiculous now. Some people I know, they have to write, they have to shoot video, they have to edit video, they have to take still pictures, and they have to record sound for radio, right? And they have to publish on several different media platforms, right? They can't do that well. Even like I was what's called a one-man band. They call them a one-man band. Somebody that shoots the video and edits the video and writes the story, all of it, right? Now, do you know what a one-man band is? Really? It's somebody who can play all different instruments, right? This issue, because there's such a desire for content. We all have our handphones now, and we want video. We want video and sound now, lots of it. Everybody wants their own different channel, right? So there's this demand for content, but because there's so many different channels, there's not as much money to go around as there was before. Like in the United States, before you had ABC, NBC, and CBS. They would spend $100,000 on a 60 minutes segment, right? Now that money is being diluted amongst many different sources. So the quality is going down, and each journalist is being asked to do more. Okay, sure.
What do you think about the blogger have a name or anonymous?
That's a good question. I know that came up here in South Korea. That's a really tough one, because people will argue that free speech should be guaranteed, and everything, that there's tremendous value in free speech. At the same time, there are limitations to free speech that exist in every democracy. Absolute free speech doesn't really exist. There's certain things that you can't say in every country in the world, and so having to put your real name, it's tough. If you think of a blog, right? If it's, let's say, an online commentary, there's a newspaper article and they have a comment section below, right? I don't think you should have to put your real name there, right? They can just take it off if they don't like the comment. Right? The blog is something where I guess maybe the server administrator would be able to delete sensitive or illegal speech, like, let's say, hate speech. But as far as the real naming goes on other comment sites, like, what's that site? Very ultra-conservative, slamming women website. Yeah. that site.
It's a political party.
Yeah, I don't think that they should have to have real naming on that site. I think they should just delete comments that were hate speech. So, you know, that's a very difficult one. I agree with what the government decided, though, not demanding that people have to have their name, disclose their name.
So sometimes when I mention like foreign presence in one country, sometimes we expect some kind of ethics or morals that we can get from them because it's a small country, easily confined by one government, one doctrine, because we use one language, one ethnic identity whatsoever. So we expect sometimes some kind of leverage effect between inside and outside. You know what I mean? And now, for instance, we have experienced that back in the 80s. Our media was totally under control. And so many people died. No national broadcast ever mentioned anything about what's happening on the street. But there was a leaking. It was a positive leaking from inside to outside, and the foreigners first opened up that, you know, the news to the outside first. So the whole positive effect comes from outside to inside. So, for instance, now, I don't know, someone else's idea, but somehow the Korean audience is dying for that kind of leverage effect from the outside first, because our total media is in control now, back again, as in the 70s. And in that case, I get a little bit alarmed that, disappointed a little bit that huge amount of, because you said information distributor is a power. No matter how poor they are, no matter how many cameras they have in their company, still it's a good editor. They have the talent and the power and public trust. Because we cannot actually discern what is true or not anyways. In that case, we are expecting somehow the Media Act whatsoever totally depress people's opinion about the media now. I get a little bit disappointed that any foreign correspondent whatsoever opened up this as a kind of outlet from outside to the Korean inside, because it's getting isolated more and more. That's what it's a very ridiculous kind of contradiction now. Everybody's talking about globalization. It's pretty much conservative society back again. And the media is super conservative, newspapers silenced, and then Korean audiences have huge, high expectation about this media awareness. They have very sharp, sensitive awareness about this media representation through the experience of the 90s and 2000. And then we got kind of stunned now. God, we should get, deaf and blind once again. And then in that case, we are looking at, I believe so many people here might read New York Times or Guardian or Nations, whatsoever, directly through the internet. And then we get, again, silent. How come any foreign correspondents in Korea ever sort of provoke this kind of outlet to the Korean media, now totally domesticated and sort of busy with selling the products as a contract workers now? So what do you think about that? Sometimes.
Well, one of the things that I was going to play for you was a report that I did for Press TV where I talked
you
about.
got censored.
No. It was really weird. I proposed to do a story about the media here, and I talked about how the president appoints the presidents of different media organizations. Lee Myung-bak appointed the leaders of I guess, NBC and KBS and stuff. And there's real control of the media here when it's the same in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
But they let me do this report anyway, which I thought was quite ironic. But the media, the foreign media here is generally quite conservative, and so they're kind of on the same page. And the government, regardless, of how narrow their scope and specific their perspective is, That's the information that the foreign media gets. And the other information that it may get from its own sources, its own fixers and stuff like that, again, is going to be from Koreans that can speak English really well. Generally, overseas educated Koreans are going to be the fixers and the assistants to the foreign news journalists here. And they're going to have, yeah, exactly. They're going to have a certain type of perspective of the news that's going to be different than an ordinary Korean person.
That's why we don't have Jeff here. That's why we don't have Jeff here in this presence. I mean, we have no voice of Jeff Kim here, right? That's fear. 잠깐 죄송한 이런 거는 오프 더 레코드는 나중에. 그러니까 제가 질문해드렸던 내용은 저희가 80년대 한국 안에
like press TV. But
제가 너무 조용해가지고 얘기를. 사실 이제 뉴스 프리즈를 잘하고 있지만 좀 더 큰 아니 좀 다른 시각으로 얘기를 좀 해보려고 했어요. 그 내용 자체 물론 그런 부분들도 들어가 있지만 좀 더 큰 상상을 해보면, 그러니까 뉴스나 미디어를 통해서 자유가 허락되는 기간 동안은 아주 짧은 잠시 동안 그게 언제냐면 새로운 미디어가 나타났을 때, 새로운 미디어가 법적 규제에 있지 않을 때 아주 잠시 동안 짧은 기간 동안 단지 그 짧은 기간 동안 새로운 기술이 급진적으로 진주하면서 그 기회가 우리가 여러 번 오고 있지만 뭐 인터넷 웹페이지에서 블로그에서 SNS에서 유튜브에서 이런 식으로 그 규제망이 있으면 살짝 피해가면서 그게 생각보다 미래에서 보면 굉장히 긴 기간 동안 잘 보였다고 얘기할지도 모르겠지만 근원적으로 그 페이퍼 나온 다음에 무비, 픽처 그다음에 무비 나오는 이 간극 동안 기술이 진보되면서 표현의 범위가 확장됐을 때 바로 그 순간 짧은 기간 동안만 단지 언론의 자유가 허용되는 거라고 저는 생각하거든요. 아주 잠시 동안만 실질적인, 아주 본질적인 언론의 자유. 그래서 이 경우에 제가 봤을 때는 그 라민이 어쨌든 라민을 떠나서 이렇게 저희가 뉴스를 보내서 전송되는 순간 여기 보면은 왼쪽에 보면 해상도가 떨어져요. 해상도가 일단 디지타이징화 되면 그 컴퓨터로 데이터가 들어가면 언제든지 조작과 복제와 확대 생산이 가능하거든요. 그런 사회가 지금 이미 와있지 너무 잘 알고 있잖아요. 뉴스를 만들어서 하드디스크에 집어넣는 순간 이미 그건 공정성은 잃을 가능성이 되게 큰 거예요. 그러니까 작가적인 입장에서 상상을 해보면 그건 기술적으로 얼마든지 뒷받침되어 있는 부분들이고 실질적으로 작동을 하고 있어요. 거기에 대해서 안 주시는데 너무 기니까 짧게 말씀드리면 그러면 어떻게 해야 될까요? 사실 이제 제가 재밌게 본 건 라민 리포트가 어떤 한국인의 시각에서 보면 굉장히 균형 잡혀 보인다는 거예요. 저는 사실 그게 되게 불편하고 이상한 지점인데 그런 지점에서 좀 가능성이 있다고 봐요. 그러니까 밸런스를 잡는 건요 절대 뉴스를 만든 사람이 밸런스를 잡지 못해요. 그게 제일 중요한 지점인 것 같아요. 이미 조작과 통제와 그리고 변화의 가능성은 컨트롤의 가능성은 너무너무 높은 수준에서 가능해요. 아까도 말씀드리지만은 데이터가 복제돼가지고 하드랑 들어가는 순간 제 입장에서 끝이에요. 이미 언제든 원하는 대로 조작할 수 있어요. 근데 그게 되게 빨리 올 거예요. 훨씬 더.
질문 두 가지만 드릴게요. 그렇다면은 뉴스를 만드는 데 있어서 결정적인 요인이 그거를 전체적인 프레임을 결정하는 요인이 뷰어라고 생각하시는지 아니면 그 지시하는 상부 어떤 정보나 이런 어떤 윗선이라고 생각하시는지에 대한 부분이고요.
다시 한번요.
그게 결정적인 프레임이 결정되는 팩터가 가장 중요한 요인이 뭔지.
그거는 이제 그때 다르죠.
그때 다르죠.
예, 그거는 어느 정도 의기를 가느냐
또 하나는 이거 작품을 하셨는데 여기 지금 소리가 나는 것도 있고.
다 소리 나요.
다 소리 나요. 근데 지금 뮤트를 해놓으신 거예요. 근데 이제 그렇구나. 근데 이제 뉴스를 이렇게 만드는 과정에서 프레임을 결정하는 과정에서 이것이 자기다 여기다 아니면은 이것이 디렉팅 되었다, 에디팅 되었다, 많이 되었다 안 되었다 이런 거를 결정짓는 현대의 그 뉴스에서 가장 중요한 그 요인이 이미지가 어느 정도라고 생각하시는지 그리고 텍스트가 어느 정도라고 생각하시고 그것의 어떤 관계성에 대해서 어떻게 생각하십니까? 텍스트와 이미지와의 어떤 그런 관계성에 대해서 어느 정도 비율이나 그러니까 어떻게 생각하시는지 알고 싶거든요. 작가로서. 그러니까 이거는 네, 그러니까 뉴스를 저널리스트가 아니시잖아요. 그런
네,
측면에서도
그렇죠.
좀 한번 말씀해 주시면 좋겠고
근데
그다음에 작가로서도 한 어느 정도일까 한번 생각해 보고 싶잖아요.
아니 뭐 뉴스만 대해서 특정하게 말씀드리면 비디오 뉴스는 이미지가 없으면 만들지 못해요. 그 비디오 뉴스는
그러니까 이제 여론 형성하고 프레임을 만드는 데 이렇게 기여하는 정도가 각각 어느 정도가 되는지에 대한 고민. 작가로서 바라본 시각과 저널리스트로서 바라본 시각이 어떻게 다른지.
저는 개인적으로는 이제 당연히 이제 텍스트가 훨씬 더 나아요. 네, 당연히. 뭐는 이제 표면적으로 폭발할 때 필요한 게 이제 나라점 같은 게 뭐 이미지지만 시간이 남아서 계속 남으면은 뭐 물론 비디오 영상 잘 보여도 사실 텍스트로 봐야 되는 거잖아요. 결국은 해석해서 익히는 순간 다 텍스트니까 텍스트로 봐야 되는 기본적으로. 그래서 이제 그런 시간 생각보다 그런 시대가 되게 이미 빨리 왔고 예를 들어 이 통제에 대해서 얘기를 하는 게 아니고 이미 영상이 어떻게 분석되는지를 말씀드리면 이렇게 CCTV가 요즘 막 달리잖아요. CCTV 지금 요즘 저희도 근데 너무 많이 달려가지고 CCTV가 알아서 돌아다녀요. CCTV가 마음대로 돌아다녀요. 사운드 센서로 이제 뭐가 이상이 있으면 찾아가거든요. 찾아가서 보는데 그걸로 지금 뭘 디벨롭하고 있냐면요. 사람들의 행동을 분석해서 그 사람 심리 상태를 확인하는 프로그램들을 개발하고 있어요. 그냥 근데 범죄 예방을 위해서죠. 저는 범죄 예방을 위해서. 그러니까 이 약간 좀 벽까지 얘기를 하고 싶지만 얼마 하는 것은 실질적으로 얼마만큼 높은 수준에서 컨트롤 가능한가에 대해서 말씀드리면. 그래서 이제 사람이 불안했을 때 하는 행동, 갑작스럽게 움직인다든지, 누구를 기친다든지 이런 것들이 이미지 비디오로 다 해석이 가능한 수준으로 마이크 이제 얼마만큼 퍼블릭이 되면 이제 그걸로 사람 심리 상태를 확인하고 마이너리티 리포트처럼 불안한 경찰에 바로 출동할 수 있는 프로그램을 만들고 있거든요. 하여튼 밀어붙이고 있는데 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 이제 시각 이미지로 영상으로 뉴스를 만들기 위해서 미디어가 필요하겠죠. 이런 것들을 가지고 원하는 대로 얼마든지 아주 작은 사소한 것들로 조작 가능하다는 게 우리가 조금 앞전 대선에서 다 봤잖아요. 이미 똑같은 이미지의 이름, 레터 크기라든지 그래픽이라든지.
그러면은 아까 말씀 주신 게 텍스트가 조작되든 뭐 하든 그거를 순진하게 믿는 사람은 더 이상 없을 경우 나온 다음에 알아서 해석하는 리셉셔니스트나 오디언스의 책임에 달렸다. 즉 그들이 발생시키는 텍스트가 어떻게 보면은 매우 인디비주얼한 뉴스로서 생성되는 것일 수밖에 없다. 작가가 지금 개입하고자 하는 지점은 그 사이에 서큘레이션을 도와주는 건가요? 아니면 그거를 더 극화시켜내서 본인은 최종적으로 작업이 개입되는 지점을 어디라고 보고 싶으세요? 이디야 작가가 우리나라 작가들이 이제 다큐고 어떻게 보면 자기 오피니언이고 그 말고 이제 사실 진실보다는 이런 게 가능하겠습니까? 사실 그렇다면 자기 각각의 오피니언 텍스트를 쓰는 건데 사실 뉴스를 가지고 작업하는 작가들이 만들어.
사실 예전에 제가 기본 이 다큐멘터리 가지고 베이스로 해서 뭐 이제 룰보 단위처럼 같이 6개월 같이 살고 해가서 룰보 사진 같은 걸로 다큐멘터리 작업을 한다고 한 6개월 같이 살고 막 그런 이주노동자고 이런 거 있잖아요. 같이 맨날 밥 먹고 막 애들 뭐 어디 이상한 데 간다면 제가 그때 차가 있으니까 데려가지고 막 그런 거 친구 만나러 데려가지고 뭐 그런 거를 해봤는데 그러니까 그 기초적인 저널리즘 훈련도 같이 뭐 조금 다른 차원에서 한 거죠. 다른 포인트지만 어쨌든 뭐 같이 그렇게 했으니까 한개 정도를 배웠으니까 그때는 했는데 그때 좀 심층적으로 그 한 가지 사건 이주노동자 관련된 문제들에 대해서 보면서 그게 고구마 줄기 끄집어내듯 뉴스 한 가지를 딱 끄집어냈을 때 주변 상황에 연결되어 있는 것들은 상상도 할 수 없을 정도로 많은 양들의 뭔가가 드러나기 시작하는 거예요. 거기서 아주 절편된 부분만 잘라내가지고 보여줘야 되는데 나는 이거 자를 수가 없는 거야. 난 그걸 자를 수 있는 사람이 아닌 거야. 네, 그래서 사실 이제 그 상황에 대해서 적극적으로 개입한다든지 뭐 그런 부분들에 대해서는 조금 어쩔 수 없이 그때 경험이 거리를 두게 될 수밖에 없는 부분들이었던 거예요. 그래서 이제 졸업하고 나서 제가 신문사에 사진 기자를 이렇게 준비를 좀 했었거든요. 떨어졌습니다. 했었는데 그래서 뭐 이제 아르바이트도 신문사에서 하고 막 이렇게 했었는데 이렇게 좀 그때 막 뉴스 신문들을 막 7개씩 이렇게 펴서 같은 토픽을 이렇게 쭉쭉쭉 보면 이렇게 한두 달만 해보면 되게 이제 신문 배열하는 것부터 어떻게 사기를 치는지 확실하게 알 수 있거든요. 그래서 되게 재밌게 그렇게 펴서 같은 기사를 어떻게 하는지 뉘앙스와 톤과 그 방향들이 어떻게 이제 뭐라고 해야 되지? 인식 조절을 해야 되나? 그 배열.
그래서 PD가 최고의
네.
예술가를 하죠.
네, 사진.
그거를 이겨낼 경우 작가는 파인 아티스트가
네.
어디에 개입을 들어갈 수 있겠느냐.
그래서 오히려 그런 문제가 문제라기보다 제가 문제라고 생각하는 단청 부분들을 조금 더 시각화시켜 보여줄 수 있는 쪽으로 갔던 것 같아요. 왜냐면 보통 사람들 잘 못 읽어내잖아요. 그거를 좀 쉽게 그 차이를 그 가독성 자체를 좀 넓혀준, 도폭 좀 해주는 그 정도 수준인 거죠. 그게 되게 중요한 지점인 것 같아요. 왜냐면 이제는 더 이상 뉴스 콘텐츠가 안 중요하잖아요. 그 뉴스 콘텐츠는 사실 별로 중요하잖아요. 왜냐면 제가 이 뉴스 작업을 만들면서 좀 뇌가 번아웃하는 느낌이 들었거든요. 어떤 거냐면 뭔가를 그래서 뭐 제가 인터넷 중독이긴 하지만 계속 뉴스에 나오는 아티클들을 쭉 따라서 가다 보면 내 퍼스펙티브가 사라져요. 그냥 모라를 경험하게 되죠. 뉴스 한 10시간 넘게 보고 있으면 모라를 경험하게 되는데 뭐 제가 좀 머리가 나빠서 그럴 수도 있겠지만 사실 어떤 뉴스든 입장들이 한 두세 가지로 나뉘거든요. 그래서 이제 많이 보다 보면 그룹화가 돼요. 그룹화가 되고 또 그룹들이 또 자기 성격들을 만들거든요. 한 가지 이슈에 대해서 수백 개의 뉴스가 쏟아질 때 그러면 점점점 그 뉴스들이 중첩되면서 보고 있는 사람들은 그 사건의 중요함과 무게감과 디테일의 차이, 누가 잘못했는지에 대해서 다 몰아해버려요. 그리고 그게 뭐지 이렇게 파악할 때쯤 되면 다른 뉴스가 또 나오죠. 그래서 뉴스의 목적은 새로운 정보를 전달하는 데 있지 않아요. 뉴스의 목적은 지금 보고 있는 뉴스를 읽는 데 있어요. 그게 제가 봤을 때 뉴스 미디어를 작동시키는 사람들의 가장 근원적인 목적이라고 보는 거죠. 그게 제일 큰 문제인 것 같아요. 큰 문제라고 제일 큰 포인트인 것 같아요. 저는 서로 밀어내고 있는 뭐 내부적으로 밀어내고 있고 외부적으로 밀어내고 있고 그런 시점들을 좀 이제 봤던 것 같아요. 그래서 그거를 좀 시각화해 보고 싶었죠. 제게는 이게 그리고 신문 페이퍼 몇 개 이 정도가 정보를 취득할 수 있는 게 전부였는데, 그러니까 좀 야하게 얘기하면 이런 거예요. 그게 욕망이 좀 충실했으면 좋겠어요. 예를 들어 뉴스 내용이 있잖아요. 그럼 나한테 실질적으로 영향을 주는 내 생활에 실질적인 영향을 주는 뉴스들이 있을 수 있잖아요. 그러면 그거에 대해서는 좀 잘 찾아봐야 된다는 거예요. 제가 하고 싶은 말은. 아니 진짜요. 난 그게 되게 중요하다고 생각해요. 개인이 자기 욕망에 대해서 솔직하게 다 얘기하고 찾아가는 그런 지점들이 유일하게 자기가 어떤 정보들을 잘 판단할 수 있는 동기를 부여할 수 있거든요. 그러니까 좀 그런 경험들이 조금 있어서 좀 혜택을 보다 보면 그러면 사기치는 사람도 더 많겠죠. 그걸로. 좋다 그거예요. 그런 정보를 사기쳐도 좋다 그래요. 근데 제가 봤을 때는 그랬을 때의 어느 이득보다 그걸 몰랐던 사람들이 알아서 자기한테 삶에 도움이 돼서 균형을 봤을 때 훨씬 이게 되니까 거죠. 좀 그렇게 생각을 해요. 네. 그래서 저는 라민이랑 되게 잘 지냈어요. 라민이랑 되게 잘 지냈어요. 네. 라민 저 너무 좋아했어요. 그러니까 이거 허락도 해주죠. 네. 이게 네.
이제 여론이라는 것이 그러니까 어디에 관점을 두느냐에 따라서 정말 그 디렉팅이 달라질 수 있다고 생각하거든요. 근데 그것이 근데 여론은 말씀하시는 것은 정보를 정확하게 전달해야 된다는 것에 초점이 맞춰 있는 거잖아요. 아니, 그렇기 때문에 그런 것을 정확하게 전달해야 된다는 그런 선에서 그런 주관이 나오신 걸 세웠는데 아마도 이런 것 같아요. 그러니까
지금 하시는 질문은 되게 저널리즘 입장에서 당연히 이 두 분이서 저널리즘이라는 분야 안에서 일을 하시면서 그런 질문들을 끊임없이 아마 하셨을 거고요. 작가로서 여기 있는 작업들은 그것을 우리가 어떻게 받아들이면서 살아가고 있는지이고 그것에 관한 조금 더 하고 싶으신 말씀을 저 안에 라민이라는 기자를 통해서 그 영상 작업에 의의가 되지 않나 싶고요. 저널리즘에 관한 더 깊은 질문은 나중에 개인적으로 하시면 참 좋을 것 같아요.
뭐 이제 충분히 뭐 다른 학교 질문 없으면은 한번
They have questions after.
네. 네, 이게 저 끝나고 다시. 네. 네. 뭐.
Thanks very much for coming. I really appreciate you guys making it here and that you have interest in how South Korea is portrayed in the international news media and stuff. And I hope you enjoy Kyoung-Ho's artwork. I think it's pretty interesting. Thanks again.